Hello, my name is Richard, and today I'm going to be talking about my childhood trauma, addiction history, and my trans identity, and where I am today after my journey in the mental health field here in the United States. Growing up, I was raised by my mom. Now, my dad was in the picture until I was about 6 years old when they divorced. The divorce was pretty messy. And it started when I was about 4 years old. My parents married when they were still in high school. When the separation happened, I was about 4 years old. My dad got custody, and he had married my stepmother. And she was the one who had abused me in the home. And my stepmother did not like me. I was getting my dad's attention. She was upset about the fact that she had to share attention with a 4-year-old. She started to abuse me. She would sexually abuse me. She would also starve me. She would lock me in my room, would not allow me to eat. She also used to put a baby gate up in my doorway and basically force me to urinate on myself. I wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom. And this was something I dealt with just for about a month until my mom regained custody. Now, my dad was not aware this was happening because he worked all the time. And obviously, at 4 years old, I was too scared to say anything. She would actually make up stories to him how much I misbehaved just to see me get spanked when he got home. And that's also around the time that the OSDD began to form. The trauma was so severe that at some point I just started to dissociate, and it got fragmented off as a way to get me through it. And it was only that month being with her. That's all it took for that to happen. So I am a trans man. I typically say trans mask because I tend to hover a little more towards non-binary, but it's easier to say trans man. Signed female at birth. I came out in 2017. I didn't get on hormones until about 2022, and I've been on them about 2 years now. I know I always, as a kid, I know there was always that discrepancy of like, people would say, oh, little girls do this, little girls do this. And it's like, well, I don't feel like a little girl, you know? But I just thought I was a tomboy. And a big part of this also has to do with the system, because depending on which person ends up hosting, and a host is the one that's out the most, which is who I am, can also influence how the body identifies. When Richard broke off with Rita, that's when it really became abundant, like, okay, I don't like the female body. This isn't right. And so he ended up taking over. And even now with the fusion, it's still of like, yes, it was a female alter and a male alter that fused, but I'm still trans. Because I was assigned female at birth, but I identify as masculine, as male. Some of the things that I've noticed is like, I don't have periods anymore, which is great. I hated those. No facial hair right now, I'm starting to get it. Like 2 years and I'm just now getting it. But hair everywhere else, on the arms, legs, my stomach, of course. But the body depends on your genetics, how the hormones work. I'm starting to thin on the sides. My dad's going bald, so of course that's happening to me. Honestly, I'm a lot happier being open about it, being on the hormones, because before you come out, you just have this constant feeling of like, something's not right, but I don't know what it is. And when I was a kid, up until I was 15 years old, I just thought like, I just had that feeling of like, ew. Like, you know, you just don't know. And then one of the shows I loved watching as a kid was Pokemon. I was a huge Pokemon fan. And my favorite character was Meowth. And, you know, you get curious. I was looking stuff up on my phone. I was like, I wonder who voiced Meowth. I noticed it was a woman. And I was like, a woman voices Meowth. Well, that's weird. It was a trans woman. Her name was Madeline Blostein. She was born intersex, but she was identified male at birth. I didn't know trans people existed before her. And I was like, you can do that? But at the time, it didn't click in my head that I was like a little closeted egg. I just thought it was cool. But then about 9 years later in 2017, when I came out, I was like, oh, that wasn't just me thinking it was cool. That was me being like, I should do this. But I thought of her when I came out. I was like, you know, she inspired me to do this. She sadly passed away in 2008, but she was the direct inspiration for me to eventually realize that I was trans. When I first came out, my siblings were super accepting. My brother, who's the one right under me, because I'm the oldest of four, he came out as gay. And so I already knew he was gay. And so when I said, well, I'm trans, he's like, oh, cool. I already knew that. Because like my siblings were like, duh. Because just the way I acted and the way I presented, they're like, of course you are, you know, you're not fooling us. Because of us 4 kids, 3 of us are on the LGBT community. So my brother's the only straight one, the youngest one. So it was like the siblings were cool with it. My mom, I wasn't like worried too much about my mom. I did tell her through a text message though, because I was afraid to face her. I didn't expect her to discriminate, but I also just didn't know. So I texted her. I was like, I'm trans, by the way. And she goes, oh, am I getting grandkids? And I'm like, oh, not for me. You know, but she accepted it in time. She struggled a little bit learning the pronouns, but I gave her time because she did raise me and I was 25 years of saying she, her, and then suddenly it's he, you know? And then like my dad doesn't accept it, but we have come to a consensus so that we can get along. But it was my Nana was the one that I was terrified of being rejected by, because I love my Nana. She's my best friend. She was one of the first people when I was being abused by my stepmother that was tipped off that something was wrong, because she caught me going through her pantry trying to steal food and was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I want to eat. And I was only 4. And when I finally told her, I was like almost on the verge of tears because I was afraid she was going to disown me. Even though she would never do that, he still got that fear. She was curious. She's like, well, why? And I just explained it. And she did ask, she's like, are you sure you're not a tomboy? And I was like, no, trust me, I tried. The name Richard is actually my grandfather, my late grandfather, who she was with. He died in the 80s from multiple sclerosis. That's what I was supposed to be named if I was biologically born male. So when I came out, I took the name Richard. When I told her I wanted to use the name Richard, she basically gave me her blessing to do that. So when I was 14, I was once again sexually assaulted by my mom's partner. Now, my mother did not know this was happening, and she was absolutely destroyed when she found out. Because at the time, she had just gone through her second divorce, and she was a hardworking woman. She had young children to take care of, working 2 to 3 jobs. And she met this guy, and he just seemed perfect. Like, he accepted, her kids loved him, and that was a big thing. We loved him. He liked us. He was perfectly cool stepping up and taking over being a father for 4 children. It seemed picture perfect. But behind the scenes, he was assaulting me, and he had been for about 9 months. Now, they were together a couple of years, I want to say, but he did start to assault me, and not only that, but with my stepmother, it was abundantly clear she was doing it because she just didn't like me. She was very immature emotionally, didn't like the fact that I was getting my dad's attention. He was a legit pedophile. He was sexually attracted to me. He would try to hold my hand in the car. There were a couple of times that he tried to kiss me on the lips, like he wanted to be with me. And keep in mind, I was 13, 14 years old. And this went on for about 9 months. And I had convinced myself, because I knew my mom loved him and my siblings loved him, and I was the only one he was abusing. I convinced myself, I can put up with this as long as my family's happy. So I thought it was my duty to put up with being assaulted, just so I could make my family happy, basically. Well, I then found out he was cheating on my mother. And I was just like, let me get this straight. I've been putting up with this for you to cheat on my mom. And that's when I told on him. I told my mom everything. And of course, immediately she called the police, threw him out of the house, but I felt so bad for her. She had a severe mental breakdown from it because she wanted to marry this guy. But she thought that she found the perfect guy, and he's doing that crap behind the scenes. And it was a huge mess. And of course, around that time, because it was Rita who was dealing with the trauma, but we had another break in the system, and that broke off into Richard, who again, I'm the product of those two fusing, and that happened earlier this year. But Richard contained all of that trauma. So when I say I, it's because I have his memories and Rita's. So technically they are mine. I did experience it, but it's just because he's in there. It was a mess, and he broke off to contain all of that. He became incredibly destructive, and that's normal. You have some alters that become persecutors, where they want to protect the body, they want to protect everyone, but they do it by hurting others, by hurting themselves. But why is they hurting others? I mean, because there's no alter that's dangerous. It's pushing people away, not letting people get close, having trust issues. But with Richard, it was, started drinking at 17. I've been sober about a year. It took 13 years. The last time I drank, I almost died of an overdose. But he became very self-destructive. We're talking self-harm behaviors, drinking, and it was because of that trauma, though, because he contained all of it. But he then became the co-host, and then when our divorce happened, Rita was so distraught over the divorce, she went dormant. She disappeared for 5 years. Richard was the main host, so it just turned into, with him containing that trauma, drinking, self-harm behaviors, just absolute destruction, destroying the body, destroying just anything to numb the pain. We weren't taking our meds properly. We weren't going to therapy like we were supposed to. He was just on that downward spiral, and that ultimately led to our first suicide attempt. We tried to kill ourselves when we were 25, and then again when we were 28. And it all stemmed from Richard having to contain the assault that happened to us as a teenager. Because one thing people need to understand is while there are some alters that are fragments, these alters are people. They have their own personalities, sexualities, identities. So when you have to treat somebody with DID or OSDD, you don't just have to treat the host. You have to address everyone in the system. So if you have one alter that's hurting and is lashing out and hurting the body and hurting others, it's okay, we need to focus on that alter and the damage that they're causing to everyone else. And so for a while it was Richard would be in therapy, but then he would stop going to therapy. Rita would want to go to therapy, but Richard didn't want to go to therapy. And just because we had no communication, because at the time we didn't know we were a system. I just knew that sometimes I didn't remember stuff. And I just thought it's because I have CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so because of that, it was just maybe I just dissociate so hard I forget. Well, yeah, that's a sign of DID and OSDD, is dissociative amnesia. Because sometimes that happens. We don't experience that anymore. Whenever someone fronts, I'm always co-conscious. But earlier in life, yeah, there are gaps missing. Large gaps, especially in my early childhood. But that's all contained in our little, who's off in her own little imaginary world in the back of our head. just doing her own thing, you know? She holds all that. I don't remember any of it. I am always upfront, always. So there's different terms used. You have EP and ANP. EP stands for emotional part. ANP stands for apparently normal part. ANPs, we exist to get stuff done, okay? Now, you can be both an EP and an ANP, and that's what I am. I hold trauma, but I also am the most functional, meaning I can pay the bills, get up in the morning, help us bathe, whatever. D, who's in the back, he is an EP. He holds trauma around psychosis because due to the bipolar disorder that I have, I would have such severe psychotic episodes that he ended up breaking off at one point. His name is literally short for demon because I used to freak out and I would tell people there's demons in my head because I would hear voices. And not like alter voices, but like legit psychosis voices. There's one time I had to call 911 because I legit heard a voice telling me to slit my own throat, like cut yourself, you know. And I called 911 and I'm on the phone freaking out, like the demon's telling me to blah, blah, blah. And of course the dispatch was so nice. She was like, it's okay. But when D broke off, he started calling himself Demon because I think he took to heart the fact that he broke off when Richard was having that psychosis episode. And so he's like, well, I'm just a demon. And it's just like, dude, that's not nice. I'm not calling you demon. And like, be nice to yourself. So like, because we don't have a lot of good communication and that's normal. So we just call him D, like D-I-I. And he's going to hate me for saying this. He's like the femboy of the system because he likes the makeup. You know, pictures of us with like the dark makeup and everything, that's him. When he's forwarding, he'll want, because like we're always co-con. So when I notice that I'm feeling more like, I don't want to put this black makeup on, because sometimes instead of him being up front, there will be an emotional switch where emotionally he's influencing, but I can't hear him. But yeah, that's the makeup and everything, that's him. And whenever I say that he's a femboy, I can hear him telling me off. He hates that. But yeah, he contains that. But he's like a fictive, which is also another type of alter, where he thinks he's a literal demon, but it comes from the psychosis. And so we're working on him being nicer to himself. We scrapbook, and that's how we learn about his traumas, because he won't tell us. But even then, I tend to front the most. He will occasionally pop up, and we'll do some scrapbooking, makeup, or whatever. And then the little, when she pops up, it's always like, where's my stuffed animal? I want to watch Instagram slime videos. Get your phone out. It's like a literal child, like, can I have your phone? I would say some of the stressors have to be, because I also have another chronic health condition. It's the reason I got disability. I have chronic fatigue syndrome. And that has been the main issue, is we get bedbound very easily. But in terms of like the community, with the DID community, I don't really have a lot of friends with DID. I have one, and it's suspected but not confirmed. And that's because there's a lot of toxicity in the plural community, and you don't know who you can trust sometimes. There's some great people in the community, but the community kind of imploded back in 2020, and a lot of people that I thought were trustworthy weren't. And so when I realized I was a system, it was like, no. I very rarely follow any systems anymore, save for like Multiplicity and me. Jess, I follow her. I follow Dissociated, regardless of how people feel about them. I do enjoy their content, but that's about it. And maybe a couple on Insta. For that community, yeah. And that's sad because the DID community is so accepting of like different identities and sexualities, because every alter can have its own identity, sexuality, gender. You know, like I'm asexual, pan-romantic. D is completely asexual, aromantic. He doesn't like any kind of romance or sex at all. Two different identities in terms of sexuality. But like I don't have a lot of friends in the plural community, and a part of it is just I'm kind of scared. I've also dealt with so much internet harassment and stalking over the last year with me being trans and just other dumb stuff that I'm also just very finicky about community in general and who I should trust. So when you have multiple different issues, when you're disabled, you're trans, you're in multiple minority groups, you know, you're constantly like, who do I trust? Is it safe? And I just have a handful of people I'm close to, and that's about it. Some of the main, like real main stressors, definitely with being trans, is as much as I love being open, it's getting harder to be trans in the United States. You have politicians who genuinely are trying to kill us. Like, I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. They can sit there all they want and be like, oh, well, we're just protecting children. But then when it comes to trans kids, they don't care, you know. They're trying to pass these laws to make it harder to get hormones. They're trying to pass laws in some states to literally make it to where drag queens are considered freaking pedophiles. Like Florida's tried that. Like they literally make it impossible to exist as a trans person in this country. And I have the privilege of being white. Black trans people, specifically black trans women, have the lowest life expectancies in this country. They're lucky to live to see 35. Because if they aren't being killed for being trans, they're being killed for being black, or they're being killed for being a woman. And the thing is, it's both, like, don't get me wrong, one side of the political spectrum is definitely worse than the other, but neither of them seem to be doing anything to help us. The trans community is, we're dying, we're literally dying, and they're doing nothing. They either are actively coming after us, or they're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible, it's horrible, and then nothing. It's like, you're literally passing these laws. Like, one politician, I can't remember who it was, wanted to outlaw, like, testosterone or whatever for everyone. Even cisgendered men that need it because maybe they have some health problem. Because, what if a trans person gets it, you know? And it's like, really? Like, our education system's failing. Half the country's living in poverty. People can't afford food. But you can't have a trans person injecting themselves with testosterone twice a month. That's the worst thing. It's like, they talk about protect the kids and we care about mental health, but then they go out of their way to literally try and eradicate one of the most vulnerable minorities in the country. What they're doing to the trans community is literal genocide. And I know that's a tough word to say and a tough word for some people to hear, but that's what it is. They just don't want, if they were to vocally come out and say, kill all the trans people, they'd look bad. So instead, they try to pussyfoot around it by using, but the kids, gotta protect the kids. But they did that with, the civil rights movement. Well, we can't have black people getting rights because what about the kids? We can't have women voting because what will it do to the American family? It's always the kids. Every time a new minority comes forward and is like, hey, can you maybe stop? I have a lot of friends who are trans, and it's just like, I exist out of spite. Because I know that there's a politician somewhere who's really angry that I'm still alive, and that is the only thing keeping me alive some days. Because I have that fear every time I inject my testosterone twice a week, or twice a month. And every time I do it, I'm like, there might be a point where I don't have this anymore, and I can't do anything about it. So I'm just like, I'll keep injecting it and try to get as much change as I can, and as much facial hair as I can, because once it's taken, that's it. Like my partner and I've talked about leaving the country. Because it just, there's no point staying here. There's nothing for us anymore. I mean, there wasn't much to begin with, but it's getting worse. It's like we're going backwards in time. When I'm stressed, it used to be before the integration between Richard and Rita. Rita would be very dominant and like very comforting. She was like the caregiver. She's obviously fused into me. And so when I get stressed to the point that my emotions are getting out of control, the little will actually be more susceptible to coming forward. And when she does that, we tend to fall asleep. I like to joke with my partner that it's like that Snickers commercial where it's like, you're not yourself when you're hungry, but except it's her saying, you're not yourself when you're angry, let's take a nap. Because like she'll come forward and I can hear her and she'll, I want my stuffy, I want an Instagram, and then like fine, whatever, we'll lay down, and the next thing I know I fell asleep. And I was like, I think that's her way of like, we need to calm down. Because it gets to be a lot. I think one of the main reasons, though, that in spite of all of it and the stress it brings me, I know for a fact that there are trans people who want to come out who are too scared. And so you have people like myself, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here at all, but like, because we're vocal, because we're speaking out, and we're like, I'm here, you're not going to take my rights without me fighting for it, that will inspire other people to at least hang in there. Because there's so many trans people, we have high suicide rates because of stuff like this. But seeing other trans people who are authentic and like, no, I'm not going anywhere. The only way you're taking me out is if you break down my door and shoot me yourself. I'm not going anywhere. I'm hoping that if someone hears that, they're like, okay, if he can do it, I can do it. I can't promise that it's going to get better or worse, but like, if we just stay quiet or we go skittering back into the closet, that's what they want, and we can't do that. Like, we've got to fight them, at least. I was 28. I'll be 31 this year. So the first time I attempted suicide was in 2018, and it was around the time that the divorce with our ex-husband was happening. Nothing against our ex-husband. I have no ill will towards him. It was just, at the time, Rita had gone dormant, Richard was up front, and like I said, self-destructive spiral of drinking, self-harming. We weren't eating at all. It was literally like grocery shopping was, do we have enough money for booze? Yeah, there's our groceries for the month. And, and it was that. And just constant self-destruction. And eventually, there was just like one minor disagreement with a friend. That was the final straw. And snapped. And we tried to hang ourselves. We weren't very good at it, but we tried. And pardon the humor. And my ex-husband ended up coming over because when someone who's suicidal, messages you and they're saying like, I want to kill myself, I'm going to kill myself, they're not doing it for attention, because no person goes into committing suicide like, yay, I can't wait. We don't want to do that. Okay, we are in so much pain that we want the pain to stop, but the illness is telling us that we're a burden and the only way it'll stop is if we die. So, because again, I have bipolar disorder and I was already dealing with like very severe psychosis, depression with a divorce. And so I had texted my ex-husband and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And luckily, his mother, who was the friend that I'd had that spat with, her and I are still very close. She's my best friend, one of my best friends. She found out that I was going to kill myself and broke my door down. Like literally broke the door. Because I don't know, maybe it was God, but the door was unlocked. Because I usually didn't lock, I always locked my door because I'm paranoid. She like kicked the door in and stopped me. And then my ex-husband came over. And then about 4 days later is when I went to inpatient for the first time. And when I went to the hospital for the intake for the inpatient, the doctor was like, you should have came to us on Monday when you tried to kill yourself, but we're glad you're here now. But then the second suicide attempt, I tried to drink myself to death and got really off, pardon my French, sorry, got really angry because I drank 4 bottles of wine and nothing happened. I mean, I got drunk, woke up with a hangover, and I was like, well, you know, it was just kind of a half attempt. Like, it wasn't that bad. And my therapist was like, you did it with the intention of dying. That was a suicide attempt. And I was just like, son of a gun. But yes, I had such a high tolerance at the time. And it wasn't like 4 bottles of wine in 1 hour. It was stretched over, but I just kept drinking and drinking, hoping that I would like pass out and die of alcohol poisoning in my sleep. No. And yeah, and then eventually, I'm glad that didn't happen. And I'm also glad that the actual alcohol poisoning I got last year that almost killed me didn't kill me. But that was an accident. That wasn't purposeful that time. Being trans is a lot like, I feel like you put your shoes on and one of your sock like slips halfway down on your foot and you can't fix it. And you're like, something's wrong and I can't fix it. That's what it's like. And for me, obviously, up until I was a teenager, I didn't even know trans existed. So I just didn't feel comfortable in my body ever, no matter how I dressed, how I talked, how I acted. Nothing fixed it, nothing. And like I had said, you know, I didn't know what trans was until I discovered Madeline Blostein, and that's when I was first introduced to like, oh, trans exists, and that's so cool. Like, I wasn't even put off by the fact that she was trans. I thought it was cool. But yeah, it is. It's like you're in a suit, like a meat suit that's not yours. And you just sit there like, yeah. And being trans is so different for everyone, because some people have gender dysphoria, which is what I have. You can be diagnosed with it, and I am, through my doctor. But some trans people don't have dysphoria, but they deal with euphoria, where while they're not dysphoric, they feel better identifying as the other gender. But regardless, you just feel like you're in this, well, sock on your foot that you can't fix. Or like, you know, your socks are wet, you can't take them off, and you just feel uncomfortable. It's that, basically. My ultimate goal is to let people know that no matter what you've been through, the amount of trauma you've been through, when you are so deep and dark in that depression and in the pit and you want to die and you hate yourself, hearing someone who's managed to make it out the other side say, oh, it gets better, it just feels like a middle finger. It's like, well, good for you, but I feel like right now, you know? But I don't know what else to say other than it does. And I am going to be 31 this year. It took the entirety of my 20s. I dealt with addiction, suicide attempts, divorce, bankruptcy, homelessness. I was homeless for 1.5 years. I went through hell and came out the other side. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I came out peachy keen. I have my own problems still. I mean, when I ended up homeless, I developed a neurological condition because the stress of it literally broke my brain, you know? But the thing is, I'm now financially stable enough. You know, yes, the divorce was hard, but I have a partner now that understands everything. It's one of those things where people who have attempted suicide, who then survive and go on, will tell you, I'm glad I failed. I'm glad I failed. I was in pain and I wanted to die, but I'm glad it didn't happen. Just because I just want people to know that it will get better. But it's like a kidney stone. It will pass, but it's going to hurt when it does, you know. But eventually, when you get out that other side, you're going to look back on everything you went through, and you're going to realize, like, you know what? I'm a great person for going through that. I didn't deserve to be traumatized. I didn't deserve to go through that, but I made it, and I'm a good person. And I deserve to live a happy life regardless of what I've been through. I would like to talk about making sure to advocate for yourself when it comes to your mental health. One thing I do want to say, when it comes to your mental health, or health in general, especially here in the United States with our for-profit medical system, you need to advocate for yourself. Part of the reason that it took me so long to stabilize is I had to find multiple doctors, because there would be some that would not listen to me. I was misdiagnosed with a condition known as borderline personality disorder, which I did not have, but was misdiagnosed with it because at the time I was female presenting and I was emotional. And so they just gave me the diagnosis. And I had to deal with that diagnosis for over a decade. And I had doctors refuse to treat me, refuse to medicate me properly because they thought I was just being melodramatic. BPD is a horrible condition, and I feel for anybody that has to deal with it. I've dealt with discrimination at work because of my mental health, in the medical field because of my mental health. And it's one of those things where, like, at a certain point, you've got to advocate for yourself. You need to get a second opinion. You need to make sure that you're standing up and be like, no, I know my diagnosis is wrong. And even if you think I'm crazy, I'm going to find somebody that understands. Because if I hadn't stood up and been like, I'm done with you, and went to a different doctor, I would not have learned about the fact that I didn't have BPD to begin with. I mean, recently we found out I have ADHD. Would not have learned that if I didn't go to a different doctor. And we learned that because I was put on a medication for binge eating, and suddenly I'm thinking clearly and I can focus, and the doctor's like, oh, you got some ADD in there. Okay. And I was like, well, it only took me till I was 30 to figure it out, but now we know. But that's because I advocate. And I'm fairly certain the one doctor that was discriminating against me, I was part of the reason he got fired, because I kept complaining until I left. Advocate for yourself, but at the same time, when you're on your mental health journey, don't let a bad doctor convince you to stop getting help. All right, because I've had some bad doctors, and there were times that I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to take medication. No more therapy for me. Then I had family like, you need to go back to therapy. Go back. There are good people that actually love and care, and they're in this field because they want to do good by you. Don't let people who have no sympathy or empathy convince you or prevent you from getting the help that you deserve to get. Just make sure you're advocating for yourself.